Imagine walking down a street in rural America. It is a quiet day. The birds are singing, the sun is shining, and the wind rustles through the overgrown grass. But something is wrong. The streets are empty, not just quiet, but erased. There are driveways that lead to nowhere. There are sidewalks that stop abruptly in the middle of a field. And then you smell it. A faint, acrid scent of sulfur. You look down at the cracked pavement, and you see wisps of white smoke curling up from the ground, twisting like ghosts into the air. You are standing in Centralia, Pennsylvania. To the naked eye, it looks like nature is reclaiming a forgotten town. But beneath your feet, a monster is breathing. An inferno is raging just a few feet below the surface, reaching temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It isn't a volcano, and it isn't a natural disaster. It is a man-made catastrophe that began when John F. Kennedy was president, and it is still burning today. This is not a movie set. This is not the fictional town of Silent Hill, though it inspired it. This is the true story of a thriving American community that literally opened up and swallowed itself whole. This is the fire that won't die.
To understand the tragedy of Centralia, we have to go back before the smoke. We have to go back to when this was the beating heart of the anthracite coal region. In the early 20th century, Centralia was the definition of the American dream. It was a proud, blue-collar town of over 2,000 residents. It had 5 hotels, 7 churches, 27 saloons, and 2 theaters. It was a place where neighbors knew each other's names, where doors were left unlocked, and where generations of families lived and died within the same few blocks. But Centralia's greatest asset was also its curse. The town was built directly on top of a massive labyrinth of coal mines. For a century, men went underground to chip away the black diamond that powered the Industrial Revolution. By the 1960s, the mining had slowed down, but the town remained. It was a tight-knit community, unaware that they were living on top of a combustible honeycomb. The date was May 27, 1962. It was a Sunday. The town was preparing for Memorial Day, a day of parades and remembrance. The town council had a problem, though. The local landfill, an illegal dump site located in an abandoned strip mine pit near the Oddfellow Cemetery, was overflowing with trash. They wanted it cleaned up before the holiday of visitors arrived. The solution seemed simple. It was a method they had used before. Burn it. 5 volunteer firefighters were hired to set the dump on fire, let it burn the trash, and then extinguish it. It was routine. They lit the match, watched the garbage burn, and then doused the flames with water hoses. They went home, thinking the job was done. But they were wrong. Deep at the bottom of that pit, hidden beneath layers of wet ash and garbage, an ember survived. It found a hole, an unsealed opening that led directly into the vast, complex maze of abandoned coal mines beneath the town. The fire didn't die. It migrated. It crawled into the earth, finding a fuel source that was virtually infinite, the anthracite coal itself.
In the beginning, no one knew the devil was knocking at the door. The fire spread slowly, creeping inch by inch through the dark tunnels. It was an invisible enemy. Weeks turned into months. Residents began to notice strange things. The smell of burning trash never really went away. It hung over the town like a foul fog. People started complaining of headaches and nausea, early signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, though they didn't know it yet. The first terrifying physical evidence didn't come from a scientist, but from a gas station owner named John Coddington. It was 1979, nearly 17 years after the fire started. The fire had been burning secretly for almost 2 decades. John was checking the fuel levels in his underground tanks. When he pulled out the dipstick to measure the gasoline, it seemed hot. Curious, he lowered a thermometer into the tank on a string. When he pulled it up, he couldn't believe his eyes. The temperature of the gasoline stored underground was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. He was sitting on a bomb. The fire had moved directly underneath his business, heating the ground so intensely that it was cooking the fuel. The gas station was condemned and torn down, but the panic was just beginning. The fire was no longer just a nuisance. It was hunting them. If the gas station was the warning, what happened on Valentine's Day, 1981, was the breaking point. It is the story that every child in Pennsylvania knows, the moment Centralia went from a problem to a horror story. Todd Domboski was just 12 years old. He was playing in his grandmother's backyard, wearing a bright orange parka. He noticed a wisp of smoke coming from the ground near a tree root. Curious, he walked over to investigate. Suddenly, the ground beneath him liquefied. A sinkhole 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep opened up instantly. Todd fell in. He grabbed onto a tree root, screaming for his life, his legs dangling into the abyss. Below him was nothing but hot, toxic mud and a plume of deadly carbon monoxide gas. The heat was so intense, it was beginning to melt his sneakers. This was the reality of Centralia. The ground could literally eat you alive. Luckily, Todd's cousin, Eric, was nearby and heard his screams. He pulled Todd out of the hole just in time. When experts later measured the air coming out of that hole, they found lethal levels of carbon monoxide. If Todd had fallen all the way in, or if he had stayed there for just a minute longer, he would have died. The incident made national headlines. The United States Congress took notice. Centralia was no longer just a small town with a fire. It was a disaster zone.
You might think that a fire burning beneath a town would unite the people. In Hollywood movies, everyone bands together to fight the disaster. In Centralia, the opposite happened. The fire didn't just burn the coal, it burned the community apart. The town split into two factions. One group believed the fire was a direct threat to their lives. They saw the smoke in their basements, their canaries dying in cages, and their children getting sick. They wanted the government to buy them out so they could leave. The other group believed it was a conspiracy. They thought the government was exaggerating the fire to steal the mineral rights to the coal. They didn't want to leave their ancestral homes. They argued that the fire wasn't that bad, that they could live with it. Neighbors stopped speaking to each other. Fistfights broke out at town council meetings. Families were divided. It was a psychological war. Living in Centralia meant living in a constant state of fear and paranoia. Every headache made you wonder, is it the gas? Every crack in the wall made you wonder, is the house shifting? The federal government eventually stepped in. They realized they couldn't put the fire out. They had tried flushing it, digging trenches, and sealing it off. Nothing worked. The fire was too deep, too hot, and too vast. It moved with a mind of its own. In 1983, Congress allocated $42 million to buy out the residents of Centralia. It wasn't an eviction, technically. It was a relocation. But for the residents, it was the death knell of their hometown. Slowly, heartbreakingly, the town was dismantled. House by house, street by street, Centralia was erased. Bulldozers came in and knocked down the Victorian homes. They tore up the sidewalks. They removed the zip code 17927 from the postal registry. The town officially ceased to exist. But not everyone left. A handful of residents, the diehards, refused to sell. They fought the government in court for decades, demanding the right to stay in their homes even as the world around them was demolished. They lived on empty streets, surrounded by open fields where their neighbors' houses used to stand. Today, less than 5 people remain in Centralia. They live in the few standing houses, surrounded by signs that read, "Warning, mine fire," and "Ground subject to sudden collapse." If you visit Centralia today, it feels post-apocalyptic. For years, the most famous landmark was Graffiti Highway, a closed section of Route 61. The fire had buckled the asphalt, creating massive cracks that smoked and hissed. Visitors from all over the world came to